Hello and welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to be joined by Alpha expert Dion McCormick, no relation. So today, Dion is going to be going over, part 2 of his talk about using Python with Alpha Anywhere. But we're also here to answer your questions, and you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel or the chat box of the GoToWebinar control panel, depending on your interface. And of course, you can always send them to us here at guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. So hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much. I'm gonna go ahead and make you it's become spring in Boston and it's just so much nicer than the winter.
Still a little chilly here.
A little chilly.
Texas is a little psychotic. Yeah, it's a little bit, one day is different than the other, but it'll settle down soon.
I'm gonna go ahead and make you the presenter so you should see a dialog box there.
Thank you.
But what is the temperature right now in Texas? Just
let's see. The temperature is, thank you for calling. We're looking at
at the time.
64 degrees. So it was a little chilly and a little bit of a breeze.
All right, that's fine. Yeah.
A little breezy.
A high teens.
So we need rain.
Oh, I bet you do.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. And we had kind of interesting weather this year. So, well, thank you so much, Dave. And it's good to talk to you and good to talk to everybody. Thank you so much for jumping on to the webinar. This is part 2 of our discussion of integrating and using Python into the Alpha Anywhere system. The cool thing is that Alpha Anywhere has made life super easy. So the part 1, we basically kind of went through how to kind of get it set up and other things. Today, I'm going to focus on how you can actually use Python with your UXs. So how you can, and a lot of really neat built-in features that I want you to be aware of that will make your life really easy. And the cool thing about Python, again, just not to overkill it, but I guess it may not be the world's most popular language. The language of love, I think, is the world's most popular language. But between JavaScript and Python, they kind of duke it out all the time. But it is super powerful, has an enormous amount of stuff, especially now that we're talking more about AI, a lot of capabilities around that these days. And again, Alpha has done a phenomenal job of integrating it with the Alpha Anywhere platform. So in our part 2 today, again, I'm going to show you how we can do a real quick recap, but then talk about how you can take and integrate that Python code into your UXs directly. Thus, you don't have to write a whole bunch of code to do that. It's very straightforward. And once we've gone through that, we'll open it up for questions. Also, and as Dave mentioned, we're here for your questions. So make sure to go to your GoToWebinar control panel, put in your questions there. We will try our best to explain and answer them. But we actually got a really interesting request through the guides at alphasoftware.com regarding how to pass arguments between basically UXs embedded in other UXs. So I've got a little, after I go through the Python stuff, I've got that I can walk you through how that's done, give an example and show everybody how those things are put together, and we can go from there. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into the demonstration. I'm going to pop over into my development environment. And as we talked about before, in Alpha, basically you have a tool under the tools menu here, Python. So when you first create this, what will happen is if you haven't done Python before, the Python basically program is already, interpreter is already built in and delivered with it. So you don't have to worry about that stuff. But you go through, and if you watch the first episode, basically it will set up a folder for you and actually will create you a sample file. And that sample file, which I've already done, will have some code and other things along in there. And I'm going to show you that in a few moments. And really all it is a Python file. So you don't have to use Alpha to edit it. In fact, you could use Visual Studio, Notepad, Notepad++, any number, PyCharm, any number of editors that you would like that have a lot of features around helping you color code, Python code, debug code, do all those kind of things there. Also, and we kind of briefly touched on it, but I'll reinforce it today, is that Alpha can also help you install what are called Python packages. And what Python packages are basically other modules or essentially code that you can bring into your project that other people have done. And there's a huge ecosystem around that that allows you to then add features and capabilities to your code without having to write it. So you can bring in this package. Maybe it's something talking to Google or something talking to Amazon or Amazon S3 or any of these other services. There are pre-made packages that people have taken the time to write, essentially encapsulate a lot of the complexity and make your life easily. And what's cool is Alpha allows you to use all of those within it. And I've fully tested it. Once you've developed it here, you can run it locally. You can then publish it to Alpha Cloud, works fine there, and you're good to go. There was a question that came out last week in terms of the version that we support. And so again, as we mentioned in the last session, when Alpha installs, it installs its own Python and everything else so that you have a nice solid environment to work off of. And the version is 3.9. So basically the current version, and there's a 3.10 and 3.11, but 3.9 works right now. It really is kind of what you want to stick with, and it's actually a very widely supported version. Most of the new ones just do some speed enhancements and other things like that. So again, that was a question that came out before. The trick is when you deploy it up to Alpha Cloud, it's going to pick that version. So you want to be careful not to put anything newer than that. And they're always evaluating when best to upgrade to the latest Python. Got to be a little careful. You don't want to break other people's stuff. But that was a question that came out of our last one there. So as I mentioned before on last time, we went ahead and installed and created a Python folder. In that Python folder is, let's go to all files here. It created a Python file, and this one's a little different. I've been editing it, so it's a little different from last time, but same concept. It's basically just some Python code that is on your system there. Now, you'll notice that I'm in the Python folder. And when I'm in there, you'll notice that not only do I have my file or multiple files that you can add, you're not limited to one, you can put a whole project in there based on there. But I've also have some other things, like the request library, URL. These are about calling APIs. There are other pre-built in modules. And so if you install a module in here, if you go to here, tools, Python, install a Python package, it will install that information here so that it's all in the same location for you. And then if you publish it to your server or to Alpha Cloud, all of this goes up so you have all the good, kind of the exact versions that you want on your server, and you're not going to run into problems. And again, I tested this after our last adventure, and everything works fabulous. Python works awesome on Alpha Cloud. It just goes up and starts working. And the neat thing about it, it makes your life a lot easier than doing it other ways. So, because there's so many cool modules that can do it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on demonstration PY, and I'm going to open it with Notepad++. That is my go-to editor when I'm doing any kind of text file work. It works fine. It's not a development environment, it's just a text editor. But the neat thing about that is you can use something like Visual Code, which provides you all those pieces there. And so it's a very straightforward file. It's basically, you can have your imports up here. This is if you're using specific packages, you tell it you need to use it here. But then each of these is a definitive call. So you can see these are different functions. So in Python, the way it works is that you say def, you give it the function name, and then you pass in any parameters, and then a colon, and then you indent and put the rest of the code here. And I won't go, this is not a Python class. There's a bajillion great resources on doing it. But let's look at this one. This one's a pretty simple. It's actually the prototype that goes in there. So I've got a function called hello world, and it passes in 3 items, session, request. It also imports in specific alpha libraries. These are cool libraries that allow you to talk to the underlying alpha system for both SQL and for other things, which is super duper awesome cool, because what it does is it basically allows you to, in alpha, to punch back out and talk to alpha. I'm sorry, if you're running a Python script, you can punch back out and talk to alpha. So for instance, a great example of that, which is really cool, is let's say in your project, you've set up a connection string to your database. Let's say it's a SQL Server database. You could, in Python here, import the SQL Server essentially library and then set up your own database connection, purely Python. And there are certain reasons why you might want to do that. There's some cool, like basically database libraries that are out there. But if you don't want to do that, what you can do is basically call back in to Alpha and use that Alpha connection string to talk to the Alpha database or to the database you've set up from right within your Python. So that's kind of neat, because then you don't have to worry about, setting up a whole different setup for your database and setting it up and logging in and doing all that stuff. Alpha will do that for you, which is very, very cool there. And it works very similar to how you would do any Xbasic to talk to Alpha, a database in Alpha. So it's very easy to pick up and use. So those are, by when it imports these things, it can actually talk back to Alpha, and therefore you create this kind of really cohesive working together, so you can really focus on, hey, all my databases stuff is inside Alpha, and in my Python, I call back to Alpha to get the database information, then continue doing what I want to do, which makes things very, very nice. Now, it also provides some other features, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So last time we spent some time on how to build a quick function, and then in Alpha use Xbasic and an Xbasic script, but that's all kind of nice and neat, but you really want to be able to use this from a UX so that it treats it much like a Xbasic class that you would use before. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go back up to my top level. Nope, I got to go refresh. I'll go in here. I'm going to create a new UX. So I'm basically at my web projects level. So I'll create a new UX here. And I'm not going to use any template. I'll just use it right out of the gate. First, I want to go to properties here, and I would like to use, let's just use Alpha Aqua today, make it different today. And then I want to use compact. So I just want to set my style on that. So now we go back to controls, and we can set up some controls. So I'm going to add in a text box. And then I want to also add in a button. Okay. And I'm just going to call this run Python. So the idea is I want to run my Python that's in my script here. I basically want to call this, but the way I do that is the following. So in my run Python, I'm going to create a Xbasic callback, and I'm sure everybody's done that. I'm sorry, Ajax Xbasic. Okay, and I'll just call it run Python for now. You can call it anything you want. Okay, and I'm going to create the function prototype. This basically creates one, and then I can create the function and paste it right here. That basically is the same thing as going over here and editing this Xbasic function. Click OK and OK. So let's go ahead and save this. We'll go Python demo _UX. So we'll go back to Xbasic functions. You'll see that thing I copied and pasted here. And I can do something simple by I'm going to start simple. I just want to basically read the value of that text box. So remember, I could code this, but I talked about this feature a few weeks ago. If you hit Ctrl D, you'll notice up here, you can actually click here and say, boom, and this writes the whole thing to get it. So you can go text box is equal to, and this will basically get the current value of that text box from the user interface. So remember, this is a newer feature out recently, and it's called Ctrl D, and it's really nice. It saves you from misspelling data submitted or misdoing things like that. And basically what's going on is that when the person submits this form back to it, Alpha shoves everything in this E and then allows you. And I'm going to show you some cool things about that now. So then what I want to do is just say run Python is equal to, just to send some stuff back, alert and plus text box plus, and this is just basically send back, so it will just basically respond. So I just want to make sure that when I send the information, it goes from there. So I go save, Go to working preview, nothing super excited. Okay, hello, run Python, and it just grabs this information and sends it back to me. Nothing super excited. Now, this is where we want to get it in. Since after we have that information in my Python program, I have a command here that says hello world. Okay, so it's a function. And basically, you'll notice that I submitted these three things, session, and request. So, and what it does in there is that basically it extracts the session my value, just a session value, then adds it and then returns that information back. So this is the cool thing, is that the way that Python works is that before, what you would have to do is maybe when you create your function, you'd have to add other parameters. But in this case, all I have to do is load that value into session.myValue. So I'll go back here and I'll just say, instead of text box, I'm going to go session.myValue is equal to this. So I'm putting this into my session variable there. And now that I've done that, I can call my Python code, and when it runs, we're going to pass in the session, and then inside of Python, it'll grab that data and do what we need to do. So the neat thing about that is, again, it makes it easier for you to create, like, if let's say you had 5 or 6 different parameters you needed to pass to your Python, instead of creating 5 or 6 parameters, you could just put them all in session and it'll extract them from there. Now, we need to run the code to actually do that. So let's just jump over here, go here, go docs, and I'm going to run and put it up here just so we have the documentation up here. And I'm going to put this in there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, put that in the chat window so you'll know where this is at. Okay. So basically it talks about building your function, but then what you want to do is basically call that function from here. So here's a good example of it. Let me actually go down here. Let's go right here. This one right here. Let's see, no, up right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these lines. I don't want to copy everything, but I'm going to copy these lines. I'm going to go back in here. Okay, and then I'll go back to my here. And then I want to go like that. I don't want all those comments. These comments are nice because they tell you it's kind of doing, but we'll walk through them from here. Okay. Okay. So let's walk through this. And we kind of talked about this a little bit later. This is the same thing I did before last time. Is basically the first thing we're going to do. And remember, this name, this was it put in this default, but what we have to do is when you created your Python script, you gave it a name. So let's go to all files. It's called demonstration, and that's quote unquote the module name. So if I go back to here, what we want to do is put that file here. Okay, now what does this do? This is a little helper function that basically when this script runs, the first thing it's going to do is run out and look for your Python file. Notice just the name, not the .py, and then it loads it into memory basically, and so it's ready to go. The reason you want to do this is that if you don't reload it, if you go and change that file and then rerun this script, it will run the old code, not the new one. So it kind of is smart enough to say, hey, I don't want to keep hitting the drive all the time. So the first time I'm running and anybody references this module, I'm going to bring it into memory, have it available so that the next time someone has to run it, they don't have to actually hit this, they don't have to hit the disk. They can just run it. It's ready to go. Problem in that is in development, you're constantly changing that, so you want to force it. So all this does here is basically take that module, that code that's in here, and reload it into it so it's ready to go. Now we dim a return value because we're going to get information back. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use another what's called helper function to call the function. So the way this works is that this is all, this helper Python. So first we want to call demonstration because this is called the module. That's the file where this code is working at. then you'll notice the second thing it wants to do is tell you what function. So if I look in my module here, I have a function called CallAPI, give me a joke, and hello world. So I want hello world. That's the one we're going to use here. So I put that in there, and then you'll notice that we're passing in those three other parameters, the E, the session, the request, so that when it runs it, it then puts those in there, and then they're available to use from there. So that's your standard way to do it. Now, as we showed last time, if I wanted to do this, I could add my own other parameter. You know, you can add your own parameters to it and feed those into it. It's really up to you. You're not required to feed these things in here unless they're specified here. So that's just kind of a heads up that if you're not going to use e-session requests, you can define them there. Just put in your parameters there. You're not forced or required to put that information in there. But in our case, we're going to use the ability to read session variables and pass that data into it from here. So then the last thing we're going to do is after this runs, it's going to send a value back, and we're going to show that on the screen. And if I've done everything correctly, go to working preview, put this in test. I'm going to run the Python. Okay, now very interesting. Very cool. So what's going on in this, just to show you, and I'm kind of glad I screwed it up, is that Alpha's smart enough to like see if there was a problem with the Python script and return the error code. So it's not a mystery where it just doesn't work and then you have to do a whole bunch of other stuff. It's and basically
Dion,
saying,
if I could just add for a second, at least one of our eagle-eyed viewers today has also spotted your error. So we'll go on and let you find it.
Oh, cool. Good. In fact, let's see how quick Dion can figure out how he screwed it up. So session my value.
Okay, that's where the error is apparently, is that it should just simply be my value session dot my value is correct for Ajax callbacks in Xbasic, but in Python, shouldn't it be my value?
Well, I'm getting the session variable information. So yeah, so I'm putting into session my value. Did I spell it correctly? Sorry, let me go here. Session, duh. ChatGPT wouldn't have done this. Actually, I think we just need to turn over our webinars to ChatGPT. Notice how it's spelled, my_value, and Brainiac here put it in my value. So that is a problem there. So, and that's where, I can't wait for ChatGPT to be embedded and all this stuff, because it'll go, sorry, Dave, just made a typo. Can't run that code. I'm sorry, Dave. Can't run that code. That's what you'll hear all the time, and you'll hate that. But anyway, so the problem is when I grab that data, I put it into my value without the underscore. So of course it got into, and that's kind of a, and just to show you, I planned all this just to let you know. But the reason why is that when this Python ran, it encountered a problem where it said, oh, you know what? I don't see that value here. And again, instead of just like stopping and not telling you anything, the Alpha grabbed the error and displayed it for you. So that is kind of a nice thing, because trust me, we're not perfect, and these things happen a lot there. So let's go ahead and save that just to make sure it's working. Again, the change is here, so we'll go here. And we'll run that. Run the Python. And hello, big world test. Basically, I take that incoming session value, and then I add it to here, and it functions. So that's kind of cool. So the basic concept is you write your code to here, and then you have a function, you pass in the values, and now anywhere you need that in the system, you just merely need to run this piece of command to call in that file this function, and off to the races. Now notice, let's just show you, if I go in here and I change this to webinar big world and I save this, the one in memory is out of sync, but if I run this, and we'll do this, you'll notice that it did pick up that change. And the reason it did is because I forced it to reload that module. If I take this out and I modify the file, then and sometimes it refreshes it, but there's no guarantee you will see those edits. So just keep that in mind. Now, when you deploy this to production on the server, you're not changing the code very much. So like especially Alpha Cloud, it spins up, you're good to go. This saves you a little time. You don't have to do this every time. It's more of a debugging sort of development tool than the other from there. So from there. Now, I want to cover a couple other little things and then get to our the questions and loyal listener, but I want to show you something pretty neat. So if you'll notice in here that in my code here, I am reading session.myValue, but notice what I also pull in here is E. So let's try an experiment. Let's cut out the middleman. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy e.datasubmitted. And I haven't tried this, so we'll let you know. And then what I'm going to do is go back into here. So I'm going to highlight that out, save that. I'm going to go into my demo here and here. And what I want to do is I want to say my underscore value is equal to e.unsubmit. So again, I'm not putting it in a session because I have that. And I haven't tried this, so we'll see if this works. So let's try it out. Now I'll tell you why you may not want to do this, but we'll go from there. Okay, and it worked. Notice how it picked up test, and I don't have to put it into a session variable because I passed it in that what's called the E variable. And when I passed it in here to there, it can pick up all the stuff below it. So the neat thing is you can cut out, you don't have to create all these functions and stuff. You can literally pass user interface elements directly to here. Now, the only caution I would say on that is that works great when you're doing an Xbasic callback, because when you're doing this, this E has been created, session is available, and request is available. If you try and run this from your Xbasic script, it knows nothing about these things. So, it's up to you. You can either use these if you're just going to be calling Python to take user interface elements, run some stuff, and return them data. This will work perfect. But if you're going to spend time maybe writing libraries and other things like that that are more generic, you may want to not worry about those things and like load them up as parameters for your function. Because again, I'm not required to have these. They're just in the function declaration in here. So you could do the other pieces here. Now, the last thing I want to mention on here is what's really, really cool is that because this is Python, I can import things like the request module. So the request module is a module that allows you to basically make API calls. And so therefore, you can basically in Python, it makes your life super easy when you're making an API call and requesting a resource from a web server. And so I want to show you this really cool. Let's go ahead and open Postman. Is another reason I've kind of moved to using this much and much is mainly because this request stuff. Alpha has some really nice features where you can take curl commands, turn them into Xbasic, and they do work. And they're great. I've been using them for a long time, and they're very functional. The downside is they're a little cryptic in their nature in terms of how they work, especially in kind of things that aren't just plain vanilla kind of scenarios there. So the cool thing about the request module is that it's very widely supported. So there's a lot of documentation out in the world. And did it not launch, or is it, let's see. Let me get all this down here. Sorry, I had too many things on the screen. Okay, yeah, maybe it didn't. Let me try this again. Postman. It's not launch. Wait, it's not launching? Anyway, what's cool about Postman, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening have used it, basically what it will do, which is really nice, is that after you get an API call, it's basically a way to run API calls. Once you get it running, then what it does is it can auto-generate Python code. It can actually generate many languages, but it can't Xbasic. I don't know why. I mean, come on. But it will generate Xbasic or Python code. Yeah, I know. It will generate Python code. So for instance, this is an example of the code it would generate. And so it sets all this stuff up so that you don't have to write the code. So, and in fact, you can go on to ChatGPT and say, please write a Python request example to call this API and pass these 3 parameters. And ChatGPT will literally spit out this code for you in a matter of seconds. So I'm using more and more just as a use case, Python for doing interaction with other systems through an API, because it writes most of the code. The code's very solid, very reliable, and it can handle weird things like redirects and stuff, and I don't have to really deal with it from there. So I just wanted to share that, and I'm using what's called the request module, and I import it into here, and then I can use it in my code with their code that's generated, and off to the races from there. So it's really fairly straightforward kind of stuff from there. So I want to go ahead and stop here, open any questions there, then jump over and show that demonstration of the individual who asked about the UXs, and take a sip of drink.
Excellent. Someone did ask a question about ChatGPT, wondering if we were going to wear GPT-4, wondering if we're -4, whether we're going to be using it in our documentation. And funny you should say that, because just this week we tried it out with last week's webinar. We had an AI basically watch the webinar and then summarize it minute by minute, and it actually came out pretty well. We did have to do some edits and stuff on it, but it was just like, hey, actually you summarized that okay. So I thought that was kind of neat. So that's it's really extraordinary. But yeah, for our documentation, absolutely, we'll look into that. I mean, what a really great way to access information is to get it back in just in the bits that you need, you know.
Yeah, and what's neat too is that let me jump over here. You know, the other race is to basically, oh, that's someone else's OpenAI. I'm sorry, I always do that. This is someone else. Whoever got that chat is brilliant, making like because how many people type that in? But they have ChatGPT-4 and Dolly have APIs. You have to join, you have to send them a request, and they'll let you use it. But what's nice is that you'll be able to easily within Alpha, either in Python or directly into Xbasic, be able to call ChatGPT from within your programs. And as soon as I get I haven't gotten the access yet. I'm on the waiting list because they're throttling how many people can do it. We'll have to do a demo of that and show how you can basically
show that off. That'd be cool. Yeah.
No, it's fabulous because we have so many people who have built very unique applications that are very focused on specific industries or specific use cases. Now they can tap all that data within that they've collected their process and use ChatGPT to analyze it, to summarize it, to do all that stuff. So I think we're going to see some really cool ChatGPT enabled Alpha Anywhere applications very soon because of the API capability. So good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
All right, one more question. Back in your code, we're using reload. Actually, on this very page, you're using reload module. And as you pointed out, you might want to comment that out when you go into production. The question is there some programming concept in Alpha Anywhere where it knows that it's sort of in debug mode or things like that? Is it possible?
Yes.
Sort of if statement?
So yeah. So there's two ways to handle it. One is more of like doing debugging kind of stuff. There is, if you go down, this is the newer one. Where is it? Oh, I thought it was down. Wait, where did it go? There was a sample code where it looks at the A5 res.
And figures out where it's running.
Yeah, where is that? Maybe they modified that. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go. I'm sorry. Let me go here. Okay. You have, where did it think it's all at the bottom? I'm sorry there. Okay. In the server side, you'll notice that there is a example piece of code that will evaluate whether you're in working preview or not. So basically that allows you to basically put this code uncommented, and if it finds out it's in working preview, it will run this command. So that's one way to do it. If you're like using working preview, you can put this code in there and then do that reload there. Now, the other option I have and have used is usually when you're in development, what I've done is I've set up a repository table, and I'm not sure if anybody's used it out there, but built into Alpha, and if you go to your project properties, you can go down and there's repository settings. And this talks about all this here, but basically the repository is a single table built into Alpha, or that you create that alpha then it knows about, and it's basically a key value table. And so what I'll do is I'll use the repository. I'll create a line called like debug or something like that, and it's true or false. And then what's nice is that in alpha, go back here to my code here, alpha has a command that says if a5ws underscore get from, is it, I think maybe it's a5w. Yep, get from web browser, like, and then you go debug, then okay, so the idea is in your project, you enable the repository, you create a row in there, and you just do that manually to say debug true, yes or no, or whatever it happens to be. Like maybe I say if debug is equal to yes. Now, the reason I like that is that I can put this anywhere in my project, and when it runs, it's going to look at the current database you're using. So for instance, I usually have a dev, a staging, and a production database. So I have the repository table in all three. I have the record called debug in all three. And then in dev, I put in debug yes. In the others, I go no. And so the cool thing about that is that I don't have to write a whole bunch of Xbasic to get that key value pair. This does it for me. It's kind of a neat little helper function. And now I don't have to worry about it. When I publish this to, say, the staging server, that staging server is pointed to a different database. In that database is the debug saying, no, I'm done. I don't have to worry about it. This will automatically not run this code when it goes there. So I use that web app repository function along with the repository to put in all those debugging stuff where I want it running in my dev, but I don't want it in staging and production for speed issues or just don't need it. And therefore, then my life is really, really simple. And here's what's kind of cool. Let's say I have an error occurring in stage and it only happens in stage. Well, I can quickly go in, update that field to yes, and now all of my debugging is turned on in stage, and therefore it will run that debugging stuff in that environment. And that's kind of been my fallback when things go south, is like, well, maybe I can run some debugging and get some more notifications and things like that.
Right.
So you can either use that method of just, this will tell you whether you're in working preview or not. And then I use this other method here to basically, and the other thing that's cool about this, watch if I run this, okay? What will happen is, let's see, how is that there? What will happen is that if this fails, it doesn't throw an error. It basically gives you back an empty. So therefore, you have to think about it a little bit. For instance, this would fail, so it's not equal to yes. So it would always run this because I don't have the repository set up. But the thing you need to just know is that this command right here will not throw an error if I haven't created that table or it can't find in there. It just says, hey, I can't find what you asked for, so I'm giving you back empty. So think about that, how you include it into there, because you want to kind of take into the accounts of if you accidentally didn't add it to your production, you definitely don't want to continue to run your debug code. So you have it's like if this is equal to this, oops, I'd probably set it up this way, .or not equal to. Okay, so basically I say, hey, if I find that it's yes, that or if it's empty, go ahead and run this, or actually not equal to empty. Actually, I do sorry. And basically, therefore, if I forget to do it and it comes back empty, I say, well, it didn't find that debug thing, so I want to go ahead and not do this. So I'm sorry, that may be a little confusing, but the nice thing again is it won't throw an error, but it will return an empty if it can't find a empty string. So take that into account. But if you just set up all three, you're all good. So it depends on how you want to handle it. But I find that's a very, very flexible way to basically turn things on and off within my system by basically setting values in my database. So here's a great example where I use this. is, let's say I'm going to, in my process, I'm going to send an email. So what I'll do is I'll say, like, for instance, if debug is equal to yes, then email is equal to dn@giantkillerrobot.com, else email is equal to e.data submitted email. So basically this allows me to say, oh, you know what? I want to run this code and I want to do it on staging, but I don't want people to get emails. I want to run it and I want to get that email. So you can add these kind of little things into your code that if it sees it's yes in debug mode, I overwrite that value. So instead of someone getting an email and going, what the heck's going on here? I get that email and I can
hard coding it and then forgetting to unhard code it. You could set a value repository. Oh, that's very clever. Yeah.
It works really nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use it everywhere. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So I guess we could probably do a demo down the road and set stuff up and show some examples in a future webinar if people are interested. Let us know. Anyway, I want to get to the other one real quick, and I apologize kind of yapping along on this stuff, but people are asking questions. So I'm going to go here.
Not at all. That was a great answer. Thanks, Dan. Yeah.
The Emily Latella from Fort Wayne, New Jersey called in and asked us about this question. So it's a very dated reference, by the way, but it's a good one. Okay. So let me explain the background. So this person has created a parent UX and they have a embedded UX. I'll explain how this works in a moment, but the idea is they have one parent UX and then they have a child UX that is embedded in the UX, which is really cool because it allows you a lot of really cool ways to basically keep things kind of hierarchical and simple there. So let me just show you how this runs and then we'll talk about how I set this up. So the idea behind it is I type in some information in these two, and then I hit load child. Watch over here. What it's going to do is on the fly, it's going to load up a UX over here, and I'm going to pass these variables into it. So you'll notice in a moment, there we go. So it loaded my child UX in there, and it took the data from here and passed it into this UX so that it could set the values of these fields here. So the idea behind it is now I can break my components into smaller chunks, easier to manage, easier to update. You don't have this massive UX. And then when I load it, I can pass the data into it. And I'll explain another way you can do this too, which is really, really cool. So let me explain how that works. So this is the parent UX here. And so I have two text boxes and a button. And when I click that button, it runs a piece of JavaScript action to say load embedded UX. So basically when I create this button, it's going to load that UX here, and that UX is over here. So let's go ahead and look at that action. There's my action that this button's going to run. And basically it does the open a component, says open my child UX here into panel card 2, which is right here. Okay, so that's step number 1. So all that does at this point in time is when I click that button, it goes out, grabs this UX, and then inserts that information and loads it right here. Now, the trick is that's easy, simple. It allows you to have multiple UXs you can dynamically load. It's very handy from that standpoint. But what you can do is I want to be able to pass data to that UX. So what I do first is I go onto this UX, I go to the properties. This is the child one. I'm going to the properties, and then I'm going to go to the arguments. Okay, so think of arguments as UX level variables. So I created 2 variables on the UX, or 2 arguments, one called textbox1, textbox2, and they're set at runtime. So this UX now has these 2 variables. So the cool thing about it is the system's aware of that. So those are going to be how I'm going to, so think of it as like, this is the catcher, and I've got 2 catchers, one called textbox1, textbox2, that when they capture that, that data is now going to be on this UX here. Now I'm going to go back to my parent here, and what I want to do is when I load that UX here, I want to take the value of text box 1, give it to the argument here of text box 1, same thing with text box 2. So I do that. I go back to my JavaScript actions. I go to load embedded UX. I open it here. Now, as I told you, I can specify the name and where I want to open it, but you'll notice there's something also here called argument bindings. The idea is I can bind fields on my parent UX to those arguments I created on the child UX. So I'm going to open that up. And one of the things that's so cool is that since I specified child UX, it goes, oh, hey, by the way, when you selected child UX, I looked at child UX and it has 2 arguments, text box 1 and text box 2. Would you like me to pass data to it when I run this command? You go, yeah, I could either go in here and just type in hello, and that would pass in a hard-coded hello as text box 1 or set the argument. But I can actually go in here and insert a field placeholder, and this gives me a list of fields that are on the parent and say, yeah, go ahead and take the value of text box 1 here, load the UX and pass into the UX that information. And again, you have what's called default value. So if this is empty or not available, then you can set a default variable there. And so again, what's kind of cool is you can actually load this with a static piece of information. You could actually tell it to use a session variable. You can also then use it with the curly brackets to be a field. And if you get really crazy, you can actually call a JavaScript function that when it goes to open up this UX, it runs that JavaScript, does it, and then puts that hands off that variable to the child. Okay, so basically what happens is I fill in my data here. When I click on here, it runs that action to load that UX. And when I load that action, it passes in the value of this to the argument for text box 1 and text box 2. Now that's all fine and dandy. What is happening on child UX? So again, I have my 2 arguments here. I've set those up. When I go to my server side event, when onDialog initializes, I basically grab that argument data and put it into my control on the screen. That's why when you noticed it opened up, the values that were in the text box 1 and 2 showed up there because basically the system passed those values over to arguments and then loaded them from there. So notice I'm doing this in onDialog initialize. Well, let's talk about a little bit more. So actually, before I do, I want to show another really cool thing. Before I do, are there any questions on kind of how you set up your child with arguments? Then you pass those arguments in, and then you can use those in any way, shape, or form you would like to.
Nope, no questions on that right now. Thanks.
Okay, so what if I want to do this? What if I want to have that UX? I don't want to dynamically load that. I want to have that UX shown, and then I want to pass this information to a UX that's already been shown. Either I already have it embedded or I've opened it once. I don't want to reload it. I basically want to pass in data. So there is another cool feature. If I go to my child UX, you'll notice that I'm doing this command here is setting up and loading it here. You'll notice something else here. There's another function over here called onSynchronize. I'm going to click there. Now, what onSynchronize does is that it allows you to basically trigger a synchronization event on a embedded UX without reloading it. So think about this. So I'm on my parent, I've made some changes, and now I want to, instead of reloading the UX, I basically just want to pass in those arguments and tell it, run this scripts with these arguments and do something like update the calendar or do something else. That way you don't have to wait for it to reload the whole UX. Plus, you may want to keep the state of the UX as it goes. So the system has the ability not only to run this code here, but also trigger an onSynchronize event, and then that will do that. So let's go ahead and go back here. And I apologize, I didn't get it fully set up here, but let me add another control. Actually, I'll just go into my JavaScript functions, actions here, and I'll add a new action. I'll go sync embedded UX. Okay. And I'll go in here, I'll add an action here. Okay, there's an action here called refresh synchronize embedded UX component, and it's an action JavaScript. So I'll select that. Now notice this is empty because you would embed yours. Actually, let me go ahead and just show you so you can see what it looks like. So option 1, if you're just dynamically passing stuff, things are good. Option 2 is I can go to panel card 2 here, and I can go in here and embedded object, select my child, And you'll notice now this is embedded right away. So it's good to go right in there. Now, one thing that's kind of cool is that notice how I created action JavaScript to pass those values. You'll notice something over here called argument bindings. And the same kind of thing is that when this originally, since it's embedded, when it generates this parent UX, it's going to build everything at the same time. I can still use the concept here. The problem is, do I have values loaded in at that time? Who knows there? So the idea here is that if I want to, on the fly, take this information, the child UX is the same. So now I can add that action. I can add a new action. I can refresh and sync it. I say, oh, I have to, wait, one of the other tricks is when you embed a, sorry, this is confusing, but when you go here, you'll notice that the component alias, you actually have to hard code this to like child UX. Otherwise, it won't pick it up. So again, when you embed a UX, I highly recommend you set the alias, otherwise Alpha sets it for you. Now let's go back here one again. I apologize, it's a little rough, but we'll add a new one, we'll sync. Okay. And now it's showing up because I set that out alias, and now I'll click OK and OK. So now what will happen is when I click and execute this there, it tells this embedded object to resync, which if I go to the embedded object, runs the code right here. So I can take this code here, I can grab that information, put it here. I wonder if I can use, yep, I can do that. So I can go grab this here, put it also in synchronize, put that down here. So now what happens is when I click that button, it's going to call and tell the UX to synchronize. The UX will say, oh, I've been told on synchronize, I'm going to write whatever code's in here. And when I update the code, then it will reload those text boxes based on the current arguments, because it's going to repass those arguments in there. So I hope that gives you enough. I'll be glad to send you these UXs. Just let us know. Just send a message to guys at Alpha Software, and we'll send that over to you. But I want to go ahead and open it up for questions before we finish up here. But again, you can either do it when you load the UX dynamically using just argument mapping, or you can use this technique to actually already have the UX in there and then basically use the sync methodology to pass data back and forth between the parent. There are also a bunch of other JavaScript, more complicated methods. You can, like in JavaScript, you can get a pointer to your parent and then send information or request data from that. But that's much more code intensive and, to be honest, a little bit more harder to manage, but it does work and it's really, really powerful. But I wanted to use a more simplistic, which is the built-in functionality of arguments, passing them, and then using the on dialog or on synchronize to update that data. Left him speechless.
You left me on mute, unfortunately. That's what I did there.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave. I can't allow you to speak.
How to work these controls after all these years. So thanks very much, Dion. We do have a couple of questions. So let's just start right at the top. He said about 3 years ago, you, meaning you, did a 3-part series on Pusher. Do you remember that?
Oh, Pusher. Yeah. Pusher's awesome.
That's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to know, have there been any updates during that time? And
not really.
Not that I know of, but it still works. So because it
works great. And it's got all those built-in features.
Yep.
Yeah. No, there haven't. I mean, Pusher has added a lot more enterprise features, but the basic use case of the ability for you to, when you launch a web page or with Alpha UX, it will then register itself with Pusher, and then you can essentially push notifications to that web page. And it works really cool because then you get rid of like polling and other very expensive kind of server items. And it provides some really cool, like almost chat interfaces you can build. It's pretty neat. But yeah, that all works fine. No big changes. And if you follow that demonstration, you should be able to set it up on yours and have it work great.
Excellent.
Yes.
And then the second part of that question is, does Alpha Anywhere provide a method to communicate from the server to a specific client-side user? And I think that the answer is yes, using WebSockets, but that's the thing we try to avoid.
Yeah, because WebSockets are kind of going away. It's an older methodology. Yeah, definitely I would avoid WebSockets.
Right now, Pusher we rely on.
Yeah. Now there is the other method. If you don't want to push data out, you can set up in your you can basically, in client side, you can create what are called on-timer events. And on-timer events will fire a little piece of JavaScript that could be action JavaScript periodically, but that's a pull system versus a push. But that's very simple to put together. And if you're not getting too crazy, it's quick and dirty. You don't have to work with a third-party service or anything like that. So you can always do that to kind of create that.
As you say, if you had like 1,000 users
Yes.
out there every 5 seconds checking it, you would be bombarded, 12,000 times a minute.
Your server would just be like, what?
Exactly.
Lay off,
right.
lay off.
AWS would be happy to take your money, but it's not
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, so the other question we have here is, so the UX that you just demonstrated has, would that also work in Alpha Launch? And is there anything you need to do to it?
I believe so. I have not tested that, so I can't, but Alpha Launch supports
put a UX in a UX, yeah.
Yes, but the only trick there is, remember, Alpha Launch is kind of the world of offline. So you're probably going to want to embed the UXs so they're already in there, because if you dynamically load it, actually makes a callback to the server and literally downloads that UX and instantiates it into the DOM, into the screen. So, again, it'll work, but if you're offline in Alpha, in Launch, then it will just say, sorry, I can't do that. So you just have to be a little wary, and therefore you can embed the object and then it will work fine because it's already in there when it downloads.
Like you've done here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Exactly.
But to answer the question, is there anything you have to do? I always remind people, yes, put an exit button on it. that's the thing I always forget with Alpha launches. I'm like, hey, it's running great.
Yes.
Let's go back to the menu. I forgot to put an exit button on it.
No, it doesn't happen.
So next up, the next question was, first of all, can you place that embedded UX inside a panel? And you actually have in your example. So that question is answered, I believe. The next one is, can you delay the render until it's, can you delay render till visible? I guess is the question on that particular.
Yes. It's over here. So you select the embedded object in there. So it saves you some time there. Yeah. And also you can say refresh when panel card gets focus. That's kind of cool because if you have like sort of, 5 panel cards with 5 UXs, it will take care of doing a refresh for those instead of viewing. And also this is the other one, synchronize. So remember that child UX, I can explicitly tell it to run this synchronize code. If you select synchronize when panel card gets focused, when this panel card gets focused, it immediately tells the embedded object to run this code. So the cool thing about that is that if on any of your other panels you've adjusted anything, it will then, basically resynchronize this because it can pass those values into this, and this can re-render saying, oh yeah, you changed text box. When I went to panel card 2, I went ahead and pulled that, ran that script, grabbed that argument and updated this. So maybe it updated like a schedule or a list or something else. So therefore you don't have to worry about writing buttons to call explicitly synchronize. Alpha will take care of doing that for you with this function here.
Very cool. I believe we have made it through the questions. And
awesome.
And we made it through the time.
Good
at the
questions.
Same time. This
Thank
is
you.
pretty good. Dion, thank you very much. Very much appreciate
you
presenting. Thank you everyone for showing up and asking questions and keeping it lively. If you do have further questions, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, @alphasoftware.com. Until then, we hope to see you next Wednesday at our next Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.